I am Vactor, and this is the Vactorverse. Today on the podcast, I am very happy to welcome first-time guest, Mr. Mike Spring. He's an Amazon #1 best-selling author, 3-time award-winning podcast host, and Kickstarter comic book creator, also the publisher and head writer at Out of Time Comics. Mr. Mike Spring, welcome to the Vactorverse.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I have to say that might be the best introduction I've ever gotten. So I need to bring you with me more places, I think.
Yes, I will. I'm travel size, so I'll pack up with you. I see you go to a lot of cons, so I'm always jealous when I see you there. So maybe one of these days I can join you out there. But I'm very happy to have you on our show here because you put out some great independent stuff. And I always like to have, first of all, the #1 goal of this show is to spotlight creators and kind of give them just a platform to talk about their stuff, but also where they came from and how they got into comics. So I'm very interested. I've known you for a while, but I don't think I've ever asked you before, how did you get into comics? What's your origin story as far as a comic book reader?
Okay, well, I'm going to date myself a little bit with this answer, unfortunately, because I like to keep my age a mystery. So I really got into comics back in the '80s, and it was through G.I. Joe and Transformers. My first comic that I really remember buying specifically was G.I. Joe #16. But the comic that I really credit with getting me into comics was Transformers #3. And I was big into Transformers toys, and I found this Transformers #3 comic at a flea market. It was a flea market. It was like a little comic store. It was like the current or mostly current issue. And so I was like, oh, there's a Transformers comic. And I read it. But that issue guest starred Spider-Man. And it was while he was wearing the black suit that was actually still Venom before we knew what it was going to become.
Yes.
So it was like one of the few appearances of him in the black suit as an alien costume without it becoming, Venom. Yeah. And I was just blown away by this because I was like, the Transformers stuff is awesome. And I bought more Transformers comics. And then I was like, I knew who Spider-Man was from like the cartoons and stuff, but like, I was like, what's going on with the suit? It's so cool looking. It's black and it's like an alien or something. And like, it was just so cool. So then I was like, well, now I need to read more of the Spider-Man stuff too, and that's really, so I definitely, my first kind of 2 comics that I kind of collected regularly on a monthly basis were G.I. Joe and Transformers, but it was very quickly after that I got into Spider-Man. And honestly, I think the sort of what I credit as my favorite comic book story of all time, and one of the first Spider-Man stories I ever read was from the Spectacular Spider-Man 107 through 110 of the original run. It's the Death of Jean DeWolf storyline by Peter David, which I reread it every couple of years, and still to this day, every time I reread it, I'm like, this is the best story ever. It's so amazing to me. And that I remember reading that as a kid, and we had Daredevil in it in one episode, in one issue, and everything like that. Just really, but that I was like, okay, this is it. I'm hooked, and I've been collecting ever since. And I don't even want to know how much money I've spent over the years. But
man, that's perfect. Do you remember who was publishing the Transformers and G.I. Joe?
They were both Marvel, actually.
Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah,
nice.
At that time, Marvel was kind of the king of the licensing stuff. So they had they had Star Wars and stuff, which I read a few here and there. But G.I. Joe and Transformers were both the Marvel books at that time, and that's what got me. So I was a big Marvel kid for a long time, and then I eventually got into DC as well. And now I read everything, any company. I don't care as long as it's a good book. But definitely, when you're a kid, you start off with one thing, and it just kind of expanded from there.
Right. Yeah. And everything that's on your pajamas and all the marketing stuff, it's like, all right, that's my guy. Spider-Man's my guy. I was the same way. But yeah, that's really interesting because I've had kind of all ages on the show so far. We've had some groups that skew a little bit younger, some that are a little bit older, and in between. So I like hearing how did everyone get hooked on comics, because whether it was an actual comic book like yourself or the X-Men animated show or
I hear that
the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So I really like seeing all different walks of life, but that's fantastic to hear your specific origin story. And then I'm also interested, being a publisher yourself, how did Out of Time kind of come about? Can you walk me through that origin?
Sure, absolutely. So it's Here's what I'll say. I try to keep this brief, but it's kind of a long story in that I've been a writer in some form or another for many, many years. I've done a lot of professional writing in terms of like for business and work and stuff like that. But when I finally started branching into writing fiction, I started off with prose novels, even though I think I always kind of in the back of my mind wanted to write comic books. But I was always gun shy about jumping into it. I think part of my thinking was always like, well, I don't know what I would do with Spider-Man for 12 issues. And then finally it dawned on me like, Marvel isn't beating my door down to write Spider-Man just yet. How about I worry about what to do with Spider-Man when that actually happens? Until then, maybe don't worry about that so much, So that was really the kind of the epiphany for me that got me, that said, I'm finally going to start writing comics. And I had an idea for one that was like keeping me up at night. And so once I started that process, I'm a firm believer really in kind of, if you're going to try to venture into the indie world, right? Which is tough to do. It's tough to get people to give you their money, right? When they want to buy the Marvel and the DC and the Image stuff, which I get because I love all that stuff too. But the more professional you can make it and the more you can reassure people that they're spending their money on a quality product when they're buying it sort of sight unseen or taking a chance on it, I felt like that was important. So rather than just be like, hey, I'm a guy named Mike and I wrote this comic, I thought it really needed kind of a publishing company to sort of represent it, right? And so basically I sort of, created the company as an outlet for my comics, and ideally, this is my second comic as part of the Out of Time umbrella. Ideally, at some point in the future, I would like to bring other creators in as well to be more of an actual, publisher beyond just the stuff that I'm putting out. But I do think that, my goal is with Out of Time Comics that, people, we've got the logo and everything and the website and all that people will start to see the Out of Time logo at the conventions or on Kickstarter and say, oh, these comics are usually good. They look good. They're professional. Like, when you hold one of my comics, right. And I'm not to sound whatever, but they're like really nice quality, right? Like they have nice thick paper, like thick covers, like great colors, like they really pop when you look at them. They're printed really well. Like it doesn't look like a cheap kind of indie that somebody printed off at Kinko's or something like that. So my hope is that people start to associate the name and the company, with quality books. And I think that's important, in the indie world. So that's kind of the thinking behind it and how that sort of got started. And then naming it was a whole nother story.
Now, is it a Back to the Future reference?
It is. I mean, it is because I'm a big Back to the Future fan. It's one of my favorite movie franchises. Yeah. And honestly, what happened was I was getting down to that first Kickstarter, and I was getting close, and I needed a name for the company. And I kept throwing names out, and I didn't like them, or my wife didn't like them, and she's sort of my sounding board. So I'd be like, "What about this?" And she's like, "No, that's terrible." And I made some kind of comment about, pretty soon I'm going to run out of time. And she said, "Well, why don't you just use Out of Time then?" And I was like, "That's actually perfect because." I procrastinate a lot on these types of things. And I love Back to the Future, and it's kind of catchy. So Out of Time Comics was born. So nice. I'm happy with the way it turned out. Now, just to be clear, I procrastinate, but all my books have come out on time. Never had a late Kickstarter yet. So
nice.
So it's kind of ironic almost then because it's out of time, but we're always on time. So
yeah, kind of like the opposite of the Flash, where he's the fastest man, but he's always late. Barry Allen.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, that's cool. And so far, you've had Red, White, and Broke, Confessions of an American Superhero.
Yep.
Bloodsucker Blues, Vamps in Vegas story.
Yep.
And then now your new Kickstarter, which actually comes out today as this podcast is coming out. You have a new one called Uncaped. Yes. Can you tell us a little bit more about Uncaped?
Absolutely. So Uncaped is effectively the story of what if Wonder Woman fell in love with Jimmy Olsen, right? We have this superhero named Lady Olympus. She has the powers of the Greek gods, but can only use one at a time. So she's very powerful. And she basically, on a mission with, her superhero team, gets a vision of the future where it basically reveals her entire life in front of her. And it is her in, the rest of her life relationship with this guy. Lucas Wilder is his name. And he's an average Joe. Works at a comic book store, plays in a garage band, like pretty normal guy. But she realizes that this is her future is with this guy. So she kind of basically shows up at his door one day and asks him to marry her, which of course he's confused by. And so then it becomes the two of them sort of getting to know each other, and he's not really sure he's ready to date one of the most famous and powerful women in the world, as appealing as that sounds. And so it's really very much a superhero rom-com. I love a good romantic comedy.
Yeah.
I love superheroes, and I thought it seemed like a fun marriage. I'm going to go ahead and say I hit a lot of the traditional beats that you'll see in a rom-com movie, but that's, I think, part of the fun. If you like a good romantic comedy, I think you'll enjoy kind of the story there. It does have a lot of superhero action, of course, in it too, and a lot of humor. A little bit. It's a little saucy. It's like PG-13. There's no like nudity or anything like that, but there's a couple of adult themed kind of dialogues and scenes and stuff like that. But
nice.
It's really, I'm having a lot of fun with it, and I really can't wait for people to see it. My artist really knocked it out of the park. So
nice. And it's a full graphic novel. It's not issue. It's a full graphic novel.
Yeah, it's a 48-page. It's gonna be square bound, like the Prestige format, one-shot graphic novel. As with Red, White, and Broke, I already know where I want to go with the story if I would decide to do more. But with my first one, I did 4 single issues and then collected them into a trade, and they were all funded through Kickstarter. And that's just a lot of work and a lot of time. And it's hard to, like, when you're putting out a comic every like 6 months or so, which is actually pretty good turnaround time for Kickstarter, but it's doing it serialized. I found it kind of challenging to like keep people interested and make sure they're coming back and remember where they left off, and all of those logistics. So I really decided to switch the format moving forward, unless something happens that I think will do better. My idea right now is all of our books moving forward are going to be 48-page square bound one-shot graphic novels, with a complete story start to finish in it. Now, I may do another Uncaped in the future, right? But that'll also be a complete story start to finish. So it's one of those things where, like, if you read them in order, it'll be better, of course, because you want to see how they got together, and then the next story will be something different. But if you just pick up one, you'll be able to understand what's happening. You won't have to be like, whoa, who are these people? Or some kind of cliffhanger ending, or things like that. And it makes it a little easier logistically. And I actually found it very I don't know, freeing, I guess you could say, when I was writing it, just to know that, like, I didn't have to like space out the beats quite so much to make sure I end on a cliffhanger, and like which page is what going on, and I've got to make sure I don't get to this too early because I'm saving that for issue 2. And here it's kind of like, all right, as long as I can fit it in 48 pages, I can do it however I want,
Nice.
And so I think that's what we're sticking with moving forward.
Okay,
and I'll be honest too, from a purely logistical standpoint, at conventions, it's a lot harder to sell single issues like of a serialized book than it is like trade paperbacks and graphic novels. So that was also a motivating factor for me. Gotcha.
That makes a lot of sense. And are they all connected in an out of time universe, or is they all separate?
They are, but not to the point, like, I'll be honest, like, I mean, I never say never, right? I don't have any grand plans to do like some huge crossover, or things like that. But I will say that when I was doing Red, White, and Broke, I was on issue 4, and I had gotten the idea for Uncaped already. And so there was a scene in issue 4 where the main character, Captain Stronghold, is talking about his kind of superhero group. So I threw Lady Olympus in there as a character. So her first actual cameo appearance is in Red, White, and Broke number 4, because I knew I was going to be using her. And so then when I was writing Uncaped, I have a scene with the press where they're all like, when she's out with this new guy, they're like, Lady Olympus, like, who is this guy and this and that? And one of them, one of the reporters shouts out like, are things over with Captain Stronghold? And that's sort of, referring back to the character from Red, White, and Broke as if they've dated. But that's about like it. Like, he doesn't show up in this book, she just had the one panel cameo. It's kind of like, they're to me more like Easter eggs, than like a shared universe. Like you kind of, the idea that we see with like the Marvel movies and stuff, but again, that said, who knows if in the future, maybe I'll just decide to throw them all in one book and see what happens. But that's not the plan at the moment.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. I'm excited to check out Uncaped. So I hope everyone who is listening and watching right now will head over to the Kickstarter. We'll have links in the show notes down below, so you can head over there and check them out. Now, Mike, I want to ask you, I didn't prep you for this.
That's all right.
This is off the top. What current comics are you enjoying? And that can be whether it's actual comic, whether it's an animated show, a movie. What specifically are you really enjoying at the moment?
Okay, so let's see. Comics wise, anything written by Tom Taylor, I'm a huge fan. He's amazing. The guy can do no wrong. Nightwing is probably the best monthly book on stands. The DC stuff is fun. The Dark Knights of Superman thing that he's doing, the kind of Elseworlds thing. I just think he's amazing. So he's my go-to guy right now. I read everything he puts out. I read a lot of comics every month. I mean, there's not a lot of stuff I don't like, but I try to, sometimes there's just so much of it. One of my also, obviously Saga is a big one for me. Brian K. Vaughan, it's one of Saga might be the best comic of all time. Although I go back and forth between that and Invincible, which is also one of my all-time favorites. Like, I don't know how you pick between those two. So those are some of the things I'm really enjoying right now. I will say, kind of tying it to the movie thing, I know a lot of people gave it some mediocre reviews, but man, I fell hard for Avatar 2. I went all in on it, and I was like, okay, Jim Cameron, you got me now. Like, I don't know what it was about it. Like, I liked the first movie. I always enjoyed the first movie. I just thought it was a great movie, but I never wanted to buy the t-shirts or whatever. And now I'm like, give me anything Avatar you can give me, like, give it to me. Like, I want it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, he got me sucked into it. So, like, there's some big graphic novel coming out. It's like an 18-issue thing they're collecting in like next month. And I'm like, I got it pre-ordered. I'm like, yes, I want all the Avatar stuff.
I wonder if it's the family aspect, because I also really enjoyed the second one. And the first one to me was fine, but I really got sucked into the world of the family of all of the Jake Sullys. And I have he's actually about to turn 2 next month.
Yes.
And stories hit me differently now that I'm a father than they did before. So I wonder if that is the key Jim Cameron element that he's tapped into. It's like the family aspect of it.
That's actually a really good insight that I hadn't thought of, but I wonder if you're right, because again, I liked the first movie. I rewatched it before I saw the second one, and I thought it was great. But the second one really, really got to me. And I'm also a parent. I have twins who are a little older than your 2-year-old. But but yeah, I mean, as somebody who's in a nuclear family myself, I'm married and I have 2 kids. Like, that's a really good point, because I do think that maybe that's why I could connect to it a little bit more, was that you do have this as a parent, that, like you said, you view things differently once you have kids. I had the same experience when my kids were young, especially, but it was like all of a sudden different things would affect me different ways, and I think that he handled it really well. So maybe that's what it is, but definitely that's good. I like that. Nice job.
Thank you.
I didn't think about that, but I like it.
Like I said, it's fresh for me because he's 2, and I'm
right.
I'm waiting for that day. Actually, maybe you can give me some insight into this.
Okay.
When is it that I can sit him down, watch a Spider-Man movie, and be like, all right, tell me what you thought. Who was your favorite character? Right. That's why I'm really waiting for that. When does that happen?
Here, I'm going to give you an answer that's probably not as exciting as you would like, but it's honestly, and I'll tell you why I say this too, but it's honestly when you feel like he's ready for it.
Ooh, okay.
And here's why I say that. So I'm a big, huge Star Wars fan. I grew up with Star Wars. All my friends are Star Wars fans, and I didn't show the Star Wars movies to my kids till they were like 8. And for a couple of years before that, everyone was like, well, your kids must have seen Star Wars, right? They must love Star Wars. This and that. I'm like, no, I haven't shown it to them. And it was because my kids, when they were younger, found things a little intense, right? And they were, some kids, like, from like 3 years on, they're like, yeah, give me Walking Dead, my kids weren't like that. Like, they were a little bit more, like, got a little more scared easily and stuff like that. And, like, the Star Wars movies are relatively tame, but they have some sequences like the Rancor and the garbage pit and stuff that can be intense for younger kids. And, and I was like that when I was a kid. And so I know that, like, there were things that I saw early on that kind of freaked me out. So I waited until I felt like they were ready, which was later. Most of my friends' kids had already seen the Star Wars movies, long before that, but you got to make the choice that's right for you, Gotcha. And now, I've got one kid who, my daughter and I watch movies together all the time, and my son barely watches movies at all. And, so it just kills me a little bit inside because I'm a big, movie guy. But, so that's kind of, whenever he seems ready for it, like, I think you'll figure it out and it'll be fine.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And I'm also, I'm trying to balance the superheroes and Star Wars also. I'm like, which one do I show him
Right.
first? And
Right.
yeah. So I'm the same way. And I'm also curious how, so, you know, you and I have both gone through the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, the sequel trilogy, and now all of the ancillary stuff like Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett and things like that. So I'm wondering, when my son gets of age, which one he's going to gravitate towards. Because remember, when we were growing up, the original trilogy was coming out, and then I think we were old enough to see the prequels through adult eyes, and a lot of us did not take to the prequels well. Looking back on it now, there's a whole generation that grew up with not only the prequels, but the Clone Wars animated show and all of that stuff. And they look at it fondly, like, oh, this is better than anything.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what my son is going to actually, is your daughter into Star Wars?
She is actually, yes. And I was going to say, so, like, she's all about the Mandalorian. Like, she loves Mandalorian. Like, I mean, she's big into that, and my son does too. Actually, I mean, he likes that stuff too. But like, she's big on that, and I mean, I think she prefers the originals, because I now see, you know, I think it'll be because your son's going to watch them and have them all sort of available at the same time, right?
Yeah,
you know,
that's another thing.
We grew up with the originals, so those are our favorites. Kids who grew up with the prequels, those are their favorites. And there's probably a generation of kids who grew up with the sequels, who those are going to be their favorites. You know what I mean? So, but like when you have somebody who kind of come watch them all at the same time, because like, you know, my kids and I sort of watched them starting when they were a little bit younger, but then moving into them, you know. So she, I think, likes the originals the best, but I think she kind of likes all of them, really. I don't think she's any, you know, particularly attached to one sort of
just all
trilogy,
one story.
But she's really enjoying the TV stuff, and she loves Mandalorian like big time.
Yes, man, I can't wait. Which comes back this week as we are recording this. So
yes, it does.
I also can't wait. My wife is big into it, and we actually named our son Ezra from the
from Rebels.
Yes,
love it. Love Rebels.
Ezra
Rebels
Bridges.
Great.
Yeah. So the Dave Filoni stuff, like everything he touches turns to gold. Like
that's true.
I can't wait until he gets some type of, you know, more live action stuff than the Mandalorian. More maybe give him a trilogy of films to do.
Right.
But yeah, I'm just so excited to see what he gravitates towards. What comics, what movies, like you said. And
well, now here's the thing too, though. Just keep in mind, also got to be prepared. He may not be into any of that stuff.
Yeah, somebody actually.
I got two kids, right? And my daughter is all into all that stuff. My son is video games, and YouTube, and that's his whole thing. And he'll watch the occasional movie, and like he'll see some of the Marvel stuff, some Star Wars stuff. But like honestly, like video games and YouTube, that's his whole thing, right? So like, I mean, I hope, listen, I'm not saying that your son won't like that stuff. I'm just saying just be prepared that you're going to be all set and you're going to have all the comics and all the movies and be like, here you go. And he's going to be like, no, I'm good. Thanks. And you're going to be like, oh.
I've also been in the back of my mind preparing myself for that, but I'm trying to think positive and say, okay, he's going to like it. He's going to like the same stuff.
I got 1 out of 2, so I did okay. You know?
Excellent. Now, like you said, you're a big movie guy and you're big into movies. I was listening to your podcast earlier today after the ending, and I loved, even from the beginning. I went back to the very first episode.
Oh, that's a little rough back then. But okay.
Well, I actually really like the production value, even in the early stages. And I went through all the way up until now, and I was just going through different years, and I was like, oh yeah, let's see the progression. And I thought the quality and the production has remained high up there.
Thank you.
So kudos to you. But can you tell our listeners or our viewers a little bit about After the Ending?
Sure. So After the Ending is a movie-based podcast, and what we do is a little bit different in that we go after the ending of your favorite film. So basically, we take movies that don't have sequels, and we try to figure out like what happened after them, right? Like what happens to your favorite characters? You know, what it's. I'll be honest. It started off as sort of my interpretation of the real world intersecting with fiction.
Ooh.
And then it kind of branched out into just like, well, whatever happens, happens in the endings. You know what I mean? So the way it all got started, honestly, was I was watching the remake of Poltergeist that came out in like, I don't know, 2015 or something like that. And at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, at the end of the movie, they move out of the house and the house kind of like explodes. And I was thinking to myself, as an adult and a homeowner, I was like, what do you put on your insurance claim for that? Like, my house exploded because of ghosts? Like, you're not getting money from that. But like the whole movie, they were like, oh, we don't have any money, this and that. So I'm like, well, now your house exploded. Where do you go live? Right. So I was kind of like, okay, so what happens next then? Like we always leave these, okay, they got out of the house and then they survived the ghosts, but like, where do you go live? Like what's going to happen? So that was sort of the genesis of it. And so it started off as kind of like this sort of real world exploration of what would happen in these situations. But as you start doing movies that are like science fiction and fantasy and stuff, that obviously, so then it just really became like, well, what do we think happens after this movie? Like what happens to Ferris Bueller, after that ends? Or like, what happens after, we just did Clueless, for example, like what do they go on to do, and so that really is kind of, we even did like Titanic, which isn't an easy one. But speaking of Cameron, but so that's really so my co-host Phil, he's from England and I'm American. So there's a nice little diversity there. And we basically take turns and go back and forth. And, I'll tell my version of what happens afterwards and he tells his, and we don't compare notes beforehand. We both write our own endings. So sometimes they're very, very different. Sometimes they're a little similar, but that's kind of the fun of it. And then we talk about some other kind of movie stuff, and then we'll usually do a top 5 list of some sort of topic, like, top 5 Halloween movies or top 5 John Williams scores or top 5 remakes or, whatever, just so we can kind of talk about because there's some movies we want to talk about sometimes that you can't do after the endings for, like, because they've had a million sequels. I can't do and after the ending for Batman, because there's 80 million Batman movies and, they also, there's so many comics, like what would I come up with for Batman that is, new. So, so then we'll do like our top 5 lists. And so, it's a fun way to kind of just, I don't know. I'm always fascinated by like those types of things. Like, where does it go from here? And so that's what after the ending is.
And that's great because I think you're like me, you're a story guy and I'm not as creative as you to be a writer, but to me, it's always about the story first, no matter what the medium is. How do these characters relate in the storytelling, and how does the emotion come out in the storytelling? So that's what I like about that pitch is, okay, this is story based of, okay, what happens after this? Specifically for our comic listeners and viewers, episode 148, you interviewed Garth Ennis, one of the best comic book writers of all time.
He is.
100%. I highly recommend that episode. Was there any moments from that episode that you really enjoyed?
Honestly, Garth is, he's one of my favorite writers of all time, and he is such a great guy to talk to. We talked to him for an hour, and he could not have been just any nicer, more interesting, or more well-spoken. You know what I mean? Like, he's a regular dude for sure, but like he told great stories and he was really friendly and like totally let us geek out on him a bit and stuff like that. But I will tell you, a slightly funny story about Garth Ennis though, is that, so we talked to him like this, via Zoom and whatnot. And so a couple months later, but I said to him, I was like, okay, Garth, so is there like a secret code word I can use or something, so that if I see you at a convention, you'll remember me, and I can, I have to like wait online or whatever. And he's like, no, he's like, just say after the ending. He's like, I'll remember you. I'm like, all right, cool. So I saw him at a convention a few months later at Terrificon in Connecticut, and he was walking by my table. I had a booth, and he's walking by my table, and I was like, oh, Garth. And he stops, and I was like, I said, it's Mike from After the Ending. He's like, oh yeah. It's like, good to see you. And he like ran off, and I was like, oh well, that was disappointing. So. Like, I was kind of bummed and whatever, but the next day I went over to his table and I kind of waited till there was a lull, and I was like, Garth, I just wanted to apologize because it was really awkward. And like when he sort of said something, like when I said it was Mike from and he just sort of stared at me, and then I sort of stuttered and tried to make it better, and it was really awkward. And so I was like, I just want to apologize. It was really awkward yesterday. And he's like, no, he's like, I'm sorry. He's like, I knew who you were, but I had to go to the bathroom so badly. And I was like, oh, that makes me feel so much better. And so then we chatted for 5 minutes or so. We had a really nice conversation. He totally remembered me. He actually said to say hi to Phil, like he remembered him completely. Like he totally, it wasn't like one of those things like, oh, I remember you. Like he actually referred to things we talked about in our conversation. So I knew he really actually remembered us. You know what I mean? Which was really nice. And so it was a lovely conversation. He was a very nice guy, but man, that first day I was like, oh man, Garth Ennis hates me like that. Never gonna talk to him again, clearly.
Oh man.
But he just had to go to the bathroom. So
that's a great story. And like you said, it's always interesting when you speak to someone that you know their work and you almost feel like you know them just from their work, and then it's like, oh, this is a regular guy. This is just he's just like me. But a lot more successful. Yeah. That's great. So yeah, I highly recommend to everyone after the ending, if you're into movies or storytelling in particular, like I said, if you're into Garth Ennis comics, definitely check that out. And I also want to emphasize UNCAPED, a superhero rom-com coming out this week. And actually, I believe when this is being posted, it will be live right now or later today. I'm sorry, later today. Yes.
Yeah. If it's not right when you're seeing this, it should be within a couple of hours, and it'll be live on Kickstarter. And you can either follow the links that are in the down below, or if you just go to Kickstarter and search for UNCAPED or search for my name, Mike Spring, you should find it pretty easily as well. So
excellent. Well, Mike, I'm very happy that you took the time out of your schedule to speak with us. And anytime you want to come back, you're always welcome. You have an open seat. If you have another comic to promote, please come back. Let us know what the new project is. Or if you have another kid you want to talk, just come back. We're always welcoming here on the Vactorverse. And
that's great.
I want to let everyone know. Actually, Mike, you let everybody know, where can they find you online?
Okay, so the best places, I guess, would be outoftimecomics.com, and that is spelled in the sort of Back to the Future way, out of time, kind of like one word. Not out of time, outa, O-U-T-T-A. So outoftimecomics.com. Of course, Kickstarter, you can search for, again, UNCAPED or my name, and you'll see all of my kind of Kickstarter projects there. And then I believe all the socials are under Out of Time Comics as well. So I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm even on TikTok, although I haven't posted lately, but I do enjoy some TikTok from time to time as well. So I'm on there. So yeah, just look for Out of Time Comics, and you will find me and all of the books that you've heard about.
Excellent. Well, I encourage everyone out there, check out everything that Mike is doing. He's a fantastic guy, putting out fantastic work. I can't wait to. I'm going to be a backer of the Kickstarter, so I think everyone out there should join in that. And I always say at the ending of every episode that Mike loves comics, and you should too.